Hey everyone, welcome back to the Shivering Mouse. I'm so excited to have you back here today. I do want to ask your forgiveness. I'm not wearing any makeup today, and that's because I have a chapter due, but I went to bed without washing the makeup off my face yesterday. So when I got up this morning, my eyes were doing like that Anakin Skywalker thing. They're like, I hate you! I said, but you're my brother eyeballs! But they don't care. So like Obi-Wan, they moved on with their life, and I just went ahead and washed my face, and they'll all be right as rain tomorrow, but I just did not feel like putting mascara on and contacts in my eyeballs today. So today we're going to continue with the Chronicles of Narnia chapter 11. In the last battle, this chapter is called The Pace Quickens. Oh, apparently we're going to play with our toys. Okay. Quick as lightning, Rishta-Tarkin leapt back out of the reach of the king's sword. He was no coward, and would have fought single-handed against Tyrion and the dwarf if need be. But he could not take on the eagle and the unicorn as well. He knew how eagles can fly into your face and peck at your eyes and blind you with their wings. And he had learned from his father, who had met Narnians in battle, that no man, except with arrows or a long spear, can match a unicorn. For it rears on its hind legs, and as it falls upon you, then you have its hooves and its horn and its teeth to deal with all at once. So he rushed into the crowd and stood calling out, to me, warriors of the Tisroc, may he live forever! To me, all loyal Narnians, lest the wrath of Tashlan fall upon you!" While this was happening, two other things happened as well. The ape had not realized his danger as quickly as the Tarkin. For a second or so he remained squatted beside the fire and staring at the newcomers. Then Tyrion rushed upon the wretched creature, picked it up by the scruff of its neck, and dashed back to the stable, shouting, "Open the door!" Pagan opened it. "Go and drink your own medicine, shift," said Tyrion, and hurled the ape through into the darkness. But as the dwarf banged the door shut again, a blinding greenish-blue light shone out from the inside of the stable. The earth shook, and there was a strange noise, a clucking and screaming, as if it were a hoarse voice from some monstrous bird. The beasts moaned and howled and called out, "Tashlan, hide us from him!" Many fell face down, many hid their faces in their wings or paws. No one, except for Farsight the eagle, who has the best eyes of all living things, noticed the face of Rishta-Tarkin in that moment. And from what the eagle saw there, he knew at once that Rishta was just as surprised and nearly as frightened as everyone else. There goes one, thought Farsight, who has called on gods he does not believe in. How will it be with him when they have really come? The third thing, which also happened at that same moment, was the only really beautiful thing that night. Every single talking dog in the whole meeting, there were 15 of them, came bounding and barking joyously to the king's side. They were mostly great big dogs with thick shoulders and heavy jaws. Their coming was like the barking of a great wave on the sea beach, and it nearly knocked you down, for though they were talking dogs, they were just as doggy as they could be, and they all stood up and put their front paws on the shoulders of the humans and licked their faces, saying all at once, "Welcome, welcome, we'll help, 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 help! Show us how to help, show us how, how!" It was so lovely that it made you want to cry. This, at last, was the sort of thing that they had been hoping for, and when a moment later several of the little animals, mice and moles and squirrels and so, came pattering up and squealing with joy, saying, see, we're here," then after that, the bear and the boar came too. Eustace began to feel that perhaps, after all, everything might be going to come right. But Tyrion gazed round him and saw how very few of the animals had moved. To me, he called. "Have you all turned cowards since I was your king?" "We dare not," whispered dozens of voices. "Tashlan would be angry. Shield us from Tashlan." "Where are all the talking horses?" said Tyrion to the boar. We've seen, squealed the mice. "The ape has made them work. They're all tied down at the bottom of the hill." "Then all you little ones," said Tyrion, "you nibblers and gnawers and nutcrackers, away with you as fast as you can. Scamper and see if the horses are on our side, and if they are, get your teeth into the ropes and gnaw till the horses can break them free, and bring them hither." "With a good will, sire," came a small voice, and with a whisk of tails and sharp eyes and sharp-toothed folks were off. Tyrion smiled with the mere love as he saw them go, but it was already time to be thinking of other things. Rishta-Tarkin was giving his orders. "Forward," he said. "Take all of them alive if you can hurl them into the stable and drive them into it. When they're all in, we will put out the fire and make them go as an offering to the great god Tash." "Ha," said Farsight to himself, "this is how he hopes to win Tash's pardon for his unbelief." The enemy line, about half of Rishta's force, was now moving forward, and Tyrion barely had time to give his orders. Out on the left, Jill and Yeah, out on the left, Jill, and try and shoot all you can before they can reach us. Bear and Boar next to her, Poggin on my left, Eustace on my right. Hold the right wing, Jewel. Stand by him, Puzzle. Use your hoofs. Hover and strike Farsight. You dogs just behind us. Go in among them after the sword play has begun. Aslan to our aid! Eustace stood with his heart beating terribly, hoping and hoping that he would be brave. He had never seen anything, though he had seen both a dragon and a sea serpent, that made his blood run so cold as that line of bright-eyed men. There were 15 collarmans, a talking bull of Narnia, Slinky the fox, and Wrangle the satyr. Satyr. It was a satyr. I need to brush up on my ancient Greek, I guess. Then he heard the twang zip on his left, and one collarman fell. Then twang and zip, and the satyr was down. "Oh, well done, daughter," came Tyrion's voice, and then the enemy were upon them. Eustace could never remember what happened in the next 2 minutes. It was all like a dream, the sort you have when your temperature is over 100, until he heard Rishta Tarkin's voice calling out from the distance, "Retire! Back hither and reform!" Then Eustace came to his senses and saw the collarmen scampering back to their friends. Not all of them. 2 lay dead, pierced by Jewel's horn, 1 by Tyrion's sword, and the fox lay dead at his own feet, and he wondered if it was he who had killed it. The bull also was down, shot through the eye with an arrow from Jill, and gashed in the side by the boar's tusk. But the Narnian side had its losses too. 3 dogs were killed, and a 4th was hobbling behind the lion on 3 legs and whimpering. The bear lay on the ground, moving feebly. Then it mumbled in its shaggy, throaty voice, bewildered to the last, I don't understand, and laid its big head down the grass quietly as a child going to sleep, and never moved again. In fact, the first attack had failed. Eustace didn't seem to be able to be glad about it. He was so terribly thirsty, and his arm ached so. As the defeated collarmans went back to their commander, the dwarfs began jeering at them. "Had enough?" they yelled. "You don't like it? Why doesn't your great Tarkin go and fight for himself instead of sending you all to be killed? Poor collarmans!" "Dwarves," cried Tyrion, "come here and use your swords, not your tongues. There's still time, dwarves of Narnia. You can fight well, I know. Come back to your allegiance." "Ha!" sneered the dwarves. "Not likely. You're just as big of a humbug as they are. We don't want any kings. The dwarves are for the dwarves. Whew!" Then the drums began, not a dwarf drum this time, but a big, bull's hide collarman drum. The children from the very first hated the sound. Boom, boom, ba-ba-boom, it went. But they would have hated it far worse if they had known what it meant. Tyrion did. It meant that there were other collarman troops somewhere near, and Rishta Tarkin was calling them to his aid. Tyrion and Jewel looked at one another sadly. They had just begun to hope that they might win the night, but it would all be over with them when the new enemies appeared. Tyrion gazed despairingly around. Several Nernians were standing with the collarmans, whether through treachery or an honest fear of Tashlan. Others were sitting still, staring, not likely to join either side. But there were fewer animals now. The crowd was much smaller. Clearly, several of them had just crept quietly away during the fighting. Boom, boom, ba-ba-boom, went the horrible drum. Then another round began to mix with it. "Listen," said Jewel, and then, "Look," said Farsight, and a moment later there was no doubt what it was. With a thunder of hooves and a tossing of heads, widened nostrils and waving manes, over a score of talking horses of Narnia came charging up the hill. The gnars and nibblers had done their work. Poggin the dwarf and the children opened their mouths to cheer, but the cheers never came. Suddenly the air was full of the sound of twanging and bowstrings and hissing of arrows. It was the dwarves who were shooting, and for a moment Jill could hardly believe her eyes. They were shooting the horses. Dwarves are deadly archers, and horse after horse rolled over. Not one of those noble beasts ever reached their king. "Little swine!" shrieked Eustace, dancing in his rage. "Dirty, filthy, treacherous little brutes!" Even Jewel said, "Shall I run over those dwarfs, sire, and spit 10 of them on my horn at each plunge?" But Tyrion, with his face stern as stone, said, "Stand fast, Jewel. If you must weep, sweetheart," this was to Jewel, "turn your face aside and see you do not wet your bowstring. And peace, Eustace. Do not scold like a kitchen girl. No warrior scolds. Courteous words or else hard knocks are his only language." But each dwarf jeered back at Eustace. "That was a surprise for you, little boy, eh? Thought we were on your side, did you? No fear. We don't want any talking horses. We don't want you to win any more than the other gang. You can't take us in. Dwarves are for the dwarves." Rishta Tarkin was still talking to his men, doubtless making arrangements for the next attack, and probably wishing he had sent his whole force into the first. The drum boomed on. Then, to their horror, Tyrion and his friends heard, far fainter, as if it were from a long way off, an answering drum. Another body of Colormans had heard Rishta's signal and were coming to support him. You would not have known from Tyrion's face that he had given up all hope now. "Listen," he whispered in a matter-of-fact voice. "We must attack now, before yonder miscreants are strengthened by their friends. Bethink you, sire," said Poggin, "that here we have the good wooden wall of the stable at our backs. If we advance, we shall not be encircled, and get our sword points between our shoulders." "I would say as you do, dwarf," said Tyrion, "were it not for their plan to force us into that stable. The further we get from its deadly door, the better." "The king is right," said Farsight. "Away from this accursed stable and whatever goblin lives inside it, at all costs." "Yes, let's do," said Eustace. "I'm coming to hate the very sight of it." "Good," said Tyrion. "Now look yonder to our left. You see that great rock that gleams white like marble in the firelight? First we will fall upon those Colormans. You, maiden, shall move out on your left and shoot as fast as you ever may into their ranks, and you, Eagle, fly at their faces from the right. Meanwhile, we others will be charging at them. When we're so close, Jill, that you can no longer shoot them for fear of striking us, go back to the White Rock and wait. You others, keep your ears wide, even in the fighting. We must put them into flight in a few minutes, or else not at all, for we are fewer than they. As soon as I call back, then rush back to join Jill at the White Rock, where we shall have our protection behind us and can breathe for a while. Now be off, Jill." Feeling terribly alone, Jill ran out 20 feet and put her right leg back and her left forward and set an arrow to her string. She wished her hands were not shaking so. "That's a rotten shot," she said, with her first arrow speeding towards the enemy, and it flew over their heads. But she had another on the string the next moment. She knew speed was what mattered. She saw something big and black darting into the faces of the Colormans. That was Farsight. First one man, then the other, dropped his sword and put both hands up to defend his eyes. Then one of her bows hit a man, and another hit a Narnian wolf who, it seemed, had joined the enemy. But she had been shooting for only a few seconds when she had to stop. With a flash of swords and of the boar's tusks and Jewel's horn, and with a deep baying from the dogs, Tyrion and his party were rushing on to their enemies like men in a 100-yards race. Jill was astonished to see just how unprepared the Colormans seemed to be. She did not realize that this was the result of her work and the Eagle's. Very few troops can keep on looking steadily in front when they're getting arrows in their faces from one side and being pecked at by an eagle on the other. "Well done!" shouted Jill. The king's party were just cutting their way up through the enemy. The unicorn was tossing men as you'd toss hay on a fork. Even Eustace seemed to Jill, who, after all, didn't know very much about swordsmanship, to be fighting brilliantly. The dogs were at the Colormans' throats. This was going to work. It was victory at last. Then, with a horrible cold shock, Jill noticed a strange thing. Though the Colormans were falling at each of the Narnian sword stroke, they never seemed to get any fewer. In fact, there were actually more of them now than when the fight began, and there were more every second. They were running up from every side. There were new Colormans. These new ones had spears. There was such a crowd of them that she could hardly see her own friends. And then she heard Tyrion's voice crying, "Back! To the rock!" The enemy had been reinforced. The drum had done its work. Next time we're going to cover Chapter 12, Through the Stable Door. So I guess they managed to get them through there at last.